Fenway Rundown, October 14th. Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam. Uh, the Red Sox are still not playing baseball, and they're not making any moves. So we're a little bit limited in what we can talk about here. But uh, as they say on 98.5 The Sports Hub, we have a show
Way
to
to
do
draw
today.
people in.
I know. You turn it off. A little bit of Red Sox news this week. Coaching staff mostly. For those who missed it yesterday, as we reported, the Red Sox are bringing back pretty much the entire band, based on what Craig Breslow had said early and during the end of season press conference. It seemed more likely than not that most of the principals would be back. Assistant hitting coach Ben Rosenthal will not return after 4 seasons. Dylan Lawson is an assistant hitting coach, will be back in his role. Pete Fatse is the hitting coach, will be back. Andrew Bailey's back. Ramon Vazquez, we'll get to him in a minute, is back as the bench coach for now. Kyle Hudson and Jose Flores at first. So,
And
that
I
is
think the return of Kyle Hudson is being welcomed by the fan base, if you were using
right.
media as any sort of barometer.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the classic overreaction because he held the player, uh, at third base in a September game and then didn't send Nate Eaton in a playoff game. He's now the worst third base coach in the history of the sport and must be sacrificed at the altar of angry fans. It's kind of silly. I know you and I both think very highly of Kyle Hudson, and that's not important. What is important is that a lot of people in the game think very highly of him, and to judge him on two
Right.
decisions not to send runners at third as if that were the only thing he accomplished this year or didn't accomplish is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think, what people miss because you see him in the third base coach's box is he is the outfield coach for a team that had the best defensive outfield in baseball. I know Duran has mishaps, but he's been a huge, huge, huge reason for, the upswing in Abreu's defensive capabilities the last couple years. Rafaela, and I think most importantly, as we saw on display for most of the year, Anthony, a guy that I think made huge strides, especially when he got to the majors. And obviously, all these coaches across all of baseball have different things and different tells they work on. But when you hear, talking to people with the Red Sox or talking to Kyle Hudson himself or Cora or whoever, like some of the stuff that he focuses in on and the real technicalities and the throwing and playing balls off the wall, especially at Fenway where it's not easy. There's a lot. And think about, who he's got to work with. Duran is a guy who came up as an infielder. Rafael has played everywhere. And so, of course, he's great in center, but he doesn't have, it's not like he's only played there. And in the last 2 years, we've seen him bounce back and forth. And then, Abreu's a natural outfielder. And Anthony is a guy who, kind of skyrocketed through the minors and the bat carry him. So defense comes along next. Campbell's a guy who plays all over the field. Like this is, these are guys that are kind of learning on the fly. They're all relatively young, and Hudson. I think if you're talking about outfield instructors, probably right up there with the best in baseball.
Yeah, and let's also not forget that he is the team's base running instructor, and that may also send people running and screaming about somebody getting thrown out at second or third or home. But the fact of the matter is that they were an aggressive team. They were also a very successful team when it came to stolen base and stolen base success rate. I think they were third or fourth in the American League in stolen bases. Not exactly a franchise that you expect to run wild, and yet he obviously did a good job with the guys who do run, which would be Hamilton, Rafaela, Duran, a couple of others. I just think it's kind of absurd that people are reacting the way they did
Right.
and claiming on social media like, "Oh, great, Hudson's coming back." Like, well, what are we even doing this for? You know, it's time to pay a little closer attention.
Yeah, well, the guy who's not coming back is Ben Rosenthal, not Ken Rosenthal. And no, he doesn't wear a bow tie, but he's been a member of the staff here for 4 years. Look, like we would be just because they have so many staffers and it's very different than a lot of teams you've covered over the years. I think we'd both be lying to ourselves and our listener base if we knew the intricacies of what every single person on the staff does. There are hitting coaches and a whole team of them. There are guys who are not even considered coaching, but are strategy consultants. I mean, the traveling party is huge, and they have a hitting group of, led by Pete Fatsy, but also, other guys are in the mix there, the two assistants and these strategy guys, and all these different people, that we hear credited. And it's a long running joke between you and I and other members of the beat that we hear Alex Cora credit different people. We have no idea who he's talking about after games and have to look through the media guide and sift through the pages and figure out where an abbreviation or a nickname possibly might have come from. So, but Rosenthal's a guy who's been on the staff. To me, it's just kind of the nature of the game. I don't think that this is probably like he went from being a guy that they liked having on staff for the first 3 years to a guy they wanted to go running from. It's just, sometimes philosophies change, sometimes people aren't in alignment, sometimes, guys get looked at just for wanting to restructure. I mean, they I don't think had an assistant hitting coach until probably what, 10 years ago. Now they have two, now they have these wide teams. So, we don't even know if that role is going to be filled, So it
Right.
kind of is
Well,
what it
I mean,
is.
it seemed like he was a bit of a, I don't know. We probably shouldn't speculate, but maybe just they feel a shakeup. Luis Ortiz was let go, and that led to the hiring of Dylan Lawson or the promotion of Dylan Lawson. And there'll probably be someone who takes over Ben Rosenthal's spot, maybe someone from within the organization promoted from the minor leagues, as Dylan Lawson was
Yep.
a year ago. But it's almost kind of a minor change for a minor change sake, it seems.
Yeah, and everybody else expected to be back. We'll get to that in a second. You did have an interesting column over the weekend that was speculative in nature, and but an idea that I think Red Sox fans would get behind, and we'll see if the organization goes to the McAdam school of putting together a staff, and that'll be the first time in 40 years. But you can always hope.
Yeah, I should probably send Ron Washington a text and say sorry that I torpedoed any chance he had of being hired here. But the suggestion was to bring Ron Washington in as a spring training special instructor and some sort of consultant throughout the years who could, periodically visit the team, either on the road or home, maybe check in with a couple of top affiliates. Um, as I think most baseball fans know, Ron Washington is regarded as one of the best infield instructors. He's got a fabulous reputation in that area. Has worked not only as a manager twice in Texas and more recently Anaheim, but also with a number of teams dating back to the Oakland teams of the early 2000s. We all remember the famous scene in Moneyball where Billy Beane is trying to convince Scott Hatteberg uh, that playing first base is easy, and he turns to Ron. It's easy, and he says it's incredibly hard. Which is also part of Ron Washington's charm. He's nobody's yes man. He does things his way, and the fact is that his way has worked, and it's improved a lot of infielders, and people uh, cannot speak highly enough of him. Those here
Well,
that way, um, you don't get rid of anybody or have a scapegoat, but you have another voice who comes in. Ron is 74, underwent major heart surgery last summer, but has been given a clean bill of health, and maybe just an opportunity to sort of work and structure a job while still having an impact might be something that works for everyone. Just kind of threw it out there. Not saying it's going to happen. Not saying it's even being discussed. I just think it's something that would help the organization.
Yeah, because it's a team that has, no matter what, with different infield instructors and different people and different voices and hirings and firings and everything, nothing's changed. It's still a team that, leads the league in errors and all that type of stuff. And so he is the gold
And
standard
much
when it
and
comes
much
to
of
that.
those errors from the infield.
Right. Yeah.
And that was again the case last year. So maybe a different voice helps. It certainly couldn't hurt because they tried a lot of other things and tried going from Carlos Feblis to Andy Fox to now Jose Flores, and none of it has produced the kind of results or improvement they hoped. So why not turn to a guy who has this reputation and is looking to work?
Yeah. I mean, the other side of it is you have Story and Bregman. That's a big question mark that we'll be covering in the next couple of weeks. Generally, those guys are pretty good over there. It comes down to, they were trying to fix first base all season long and the black hole that is second base for this team and has been for 10 years, like it's just a rotating cast on the right side that I think is an issue, and personnel will obviously kind of dictate that moving forward, which is one reason. We'll get back to Varitek and Ramon Vazquez and some of the other things. It's one reason why I just think the Pete Alonso thing, especially if he's hell bent on playing first base, is just not a great fit because he is such a bad first baseman. And the Red Sox are desperately want to improve the defense, something Breslow mentioned there. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
I mean, and I think that is a factor to consider that he is a liability there. It's not just he's a little bit below average by some defensive metrics. He's one of the worst first basemen in the game,
yep.
but I don't think that's the biggest reason. Uh, I think you can look at if you made a list of the 10 worst baseball contracts over the last 15 years, I bet like seven of them would be first basemen in their 30s who signed long term deals, who can't contribute at another position and become a real drag, A, on the lineup and B, on the payroll. And we can talk about Miguel Cabrera. We can talk about Albert Pujols. Those two guys are obviously going to the Hall of Fame, no questions asked. But their deals that took them into their mid and late 30s turned down. While Alonso may be a little more athletic and doesn't have the kind of heavy set body type that both those guys did, you can see him, being a real albatross when he gets to 35, 36 years old. And if he at 31 or 32 is looking for a 7-year commitment, as there have been some reports this week, I mean, that to me is a recipe for a disaster. I don't care how much he might help the lineup the next year or two.
Yeah, and Zach Scott, friend of the program who's been on before, had a really interesting tweet. Like he's going to play his market poorly for the second straight year in hopes of a deal that's never going to come. Like, okay, like, and Zach, obviously a guy that knows him well from being with the Mets and being in charge of the Mets for a short time. If that's his read on the situation, like I know there's extension talks and stuff before they fell apart, and then last year they basically closed the door, and then had this big come to Jesus meeting with Cohen, and he ended up back there and had a pretty good year. But it's just it'll be an interesting free agency to follow. I think for the two of us, we are, and I'll speak for you on this because we talked about it in one of the last pods. When it comes to the Red Sox, still Team Schwarber. I think it makes a lot more sense from their perspective.
Yeah,
probably because we like
not to play first base, but to
yeah,
fill the DH role, right?
right,
But to give them a real power source that they very obviously lack. We saw it in the postseason where they hit one home run in 3 games. We saw it during the regular season where they were 15th, right dead. It came to home runs with 100 and
yep,
I don't know, 70 something, but not nearly enough. They need a guy who can hit the ball out of the ballpark. Nobody has done that better than Kyle Schwarber over the last few years. I think we both expect that the Phillies are going to do everything they can to retain him, but given the kind of unstable nature of him now, where that team is aging and there may have to be a reset, maybe it doesn't work out there. And this is a pretty intriguing landing spot for Kyle Schwarber otherwise.
Yeah, and so again, that'll be something to monitor as the playoffs wrap up and the World Series wraps up in a couple weeks. Last thing we'll get to, back to the coaching staff. Jason Varitek, his contract is up. He is expected to return unless he gets bites with managerial vacancies. Obviously, if any of these coaches get offered a managerial job, then they will not return to the Red Sox. Bench coach Ramon Vazquez also in that boat. The Twins reportedly interested in talking to him. One thing he has on his side is I think a lot of these top managerial candidates do nowadays. The bilingual factor, super, super important for teams. We've seen the effect it has with Cora here over the last 7, 8 years. You've seen kind of the impact that a lot of these guys have. It's a big, big advantage. And Ramon Vazquez is a close friend of Cora, but a guy that he has confidence in. Where do you peg the chances of Varitek or Vazquez getting a job? To me, there are a lot of them out there. It's a very interesting managerial carousel, but there's also a lot of really good, experienced candidates out there. If a team wants to hire like Bruce Bochy or one of those guys or Rocco Baldelli or someone like that, they can go get him along with David Ross, who's very well thought of, along with Brandon Hyde, who was a manager of the year a couple years ago. You have some bizarre, of
Bud
course.
Black, Bob
Yeah,
Melvin, Bruce Bochy.
right.
I
You have the
mean,
Angels hiring Albert Pujols for no reason. Like there's a lot going on out there. So it's a
yeah,
crowded field for a lot of jobs.
yeah. I did check with somebody with the Red Sox yesterday. As of late yesterday afternoon, there had been no calls to speak to Jason Varitek. That doesn't mean that couldn't still happen. The San Diego job wasn't open until about noon yesterday when Mike Schilt mysteriously retired from the job, which is just weird phrasing to begin with. Whatever. But that's another pretty plum job that wasn't open 24 hours ago. And so I think a lot of teams are just now putting their lists together. In general, these jobs, they want to fill them by the time the GM meetings happen in early November. Some may go later than that. So it's certainly possible that someone could reach out and talk to Varitek. I think his game planning experience the last few years and that role he's had will make him better prepared to manage. I think if you talk to people around the game, the concern is not him on the job and strategy and communication and relationships. It's more about sort of the public facing element of the job, the intense media commitments and scrutiny, the sort of public face of the franchise role. And I don't know how comfortable he'd be in that area. But, there may be teams that are willing to put up with a little bit of a learning curve there because they like what he's about. So it wouldn't surprise either of us to see Varitek, be a candidate. Seattle had some interest a few years ago. San Francisco did before they brought Bob Melvin in. Now that job's open again. Obviously, the GM has changed or the shot caller has changed. It's now Buster Posey, catcher, who knows? But nothing yet in terms of anybody reaching out to ask permission to interview Jason Varitek. It could still happen, obviously.
Yeah, I think, and the interesting thing to me there is, does he, as he starts plotting this, goal to manage someday somewhere, is it Boston or bust? Obviously, the fact he's talked to other teams in the past, kind of signifies that maybe not. But to me, it becomes a question of, okay, does he go be a bench coach for somebody? Um, I don't know what the situation with the coaching staff is in Cincinnati, right? But maybe Tito Francona would be a guy who would bring Varitek in a bigger role, where, at least here Cora has gone with three different bench coaches over the course of his time. It's never been Varitek. That's the top assistant role. And Renicky, obviously, and then Venable Cora. And um, now with Vazquez, does Varitek go try to get that job in a different market to make himself more attractive as a manager? Does his commitment to the Red Sox, almost 30 years into his time with the organization, run the whole show? Is there a point where the Red Sox look at it and say, we don't see you as a manager of this club moving forward? Like, it's kind of getting to the point where it's hard to envision him being in the role he's in, a very valuable one, but not one that's the sexiest for career opportunities in the future, forever. And, it seems like he'll be
Yeah.
back in it as of next year. Obviously, the fact he's tight with Cora, played with them, helps, and he's got a big role and an outsized voice on the staff. It's an interesting one, kind of moving forward. Of what does he want to do? If there's a bench coach job somewhere else, would he
Right.
leave? Those types of things.
Well, and the other thing is, if Ramon were to be hired in Minnesota or someplace else, would Varitek be the automatic bench coach next year, assuming he's not hired to manage elsewhere? Would that be additional on the job training? Does Cora view him as that kind of sounding board? He and Ramon have been friends for a long, long time. Both natives of Puerto Rico have kind of a shared history. Um, as you noted, there's some background with Varitek, and maybe that's a good fit. But it'd be interesting to see if Ramon Vazquez were to leave and the bench coach vacancy created here, would it be Varitek, or would they go, for another kind of coach to fill in that role?
Yep, and I think something that the coaching staff has lacked for a long time is experience. How many former managers has Cora worked with on the staff? Just Renicky in the first, really the first 2 years, and that apple cart got toppled over. And other than that, it's a lot of guys that have assumed the positions based on either working in the minors here or elsewhere. It's a lot of guys that are kind of in their first crack from Pete Fatsi, a young hitting coach. Obviously, I think Bailey had a lot of experience before coming over last year, but they kind of like to bring up these kind of unseasoned coaches and see what they could do. Maybe, some experience. Obviously, your Ron Washington candidate would be a good one there. Could help a staff. I don't know. I never think it could hurt.
Yeah, and it should be noted too that the hiring of Ron Renicky had more to do with Dave Dombrowski than it did with Alex Cora.
Right.
Dombrowski thought it would be a good hedge against Cora's relative inexperience as a manager, that you'd get a seasoned guy like Renicky who'd managed himself, been an instructor, been a coach, played. He liked that veteran wisdom for Cora to lean on. So it hasn't always been Cora's call. I think he's at the point now in his career where he's earned the right to have far more input into the construction of his staff. But maybe Breslow feels strongly about who he views in that role if it were to come open, and it'll be interesting to see how that gets settled.
Yep, and it did. Bloom kind of wanted to have Venable be in the organization no matter what a couple years ago. Interviewed him for the manager, gave Cora the job, and then Venable was the bench coach choice, even though Cora and Venable, didn't have much of a relationship. So these things always complicated, always layered, unless you go on Twitter where you're told Varitek's going to be the manager and Cora is going to be the GM under
Yep.
Breslow.
Yep. There's a few of those going around.
So, but it is mid-October and the team's out of it, so that's what we can expect. That's the Fenway rundown for today. We'll be back later in the week. What we talk about, that's anyone's guess.